All right, so allow me to talk about a couple of movies that I saw, a couple of days ago, right? So the first one, which I literally saw today, the time of me recording this, is a documentary called Made in England, the Films of Powell and Pressburger, right? So
Right.
yeah, this is just me being all film nerdy, right? So I literally stumbled on this today, right? I just saw it courtesy of RogerEbert.com, right? But one thing that struck me, not just the names involved in the title, right? But also who is central to it. We boy Martin Scorsese, right?
Right.
Because yeah, fun fact, he is a huge fan of the duo, the filmmaking duo of Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger, right? These are
Right.
two legendary British filmmakers. They were putting out films like from the 40s to like up to the early 60s, basically, right?
Right.
As the movie, lets us know right from the jump, yeah, their work has, pretty much influenced him at a young age, right? He talked about when he was young, and because of his asthma diagnosis, he was forced to be, to stay home and watch TV. 'Cause he couldn't go out and, play with the kids, right? Play sports with kids and whatnot, right? With the neighborhood kids, sorry, right? So yeah, he would see their movies, whether it's like, well, he would see like a number of British films, right? From the 40s, right? The first film that he cites is The Thief of Baghdad, which is a show that I still have yet to see. I know it's a masterpiece, but I just never got around to watching that, right? But it's the films that they made, well, I should say Powell and Pressburger made, that really influenced him, right? So when when he kickstarted his career, when he actually like put out his like official, theatrical release, film, I should say, well, his big success, I should say, in the form of Mean Streets, yeah, one of the films that pretty much, well, you could say that the work, he was really inspired by their work, right? And their work in particular involved these, how to say, it's always like it's always like this sort of stylized, even, by 40s and 50s standards, sort of like stylized version of, reality, right? So almost like a hyper reality, right? Even though they did black and white films, they really like incorporated, they really took advantage of Technicolor back in the days, right? But yeah, essentially it was just about just them just making really like lush, like just showcasing really lush imagery, just giving the viewer like this visual experience, like just something that they've never seen before, right? And it resulted in like some of their best work, right? Whether it's the life and death of Colonel Blimp, Black Narcissus, sorry, or Black Narcissus, or whatever you call it. Yeah, which is a film that I saw quite a few times. Don't love it, but I feel like if I watch it again, I will probably love it more thanks to this movie here. And of course, what is arguably the best work, and unfortunately, I still have yet to see it, The Red Shoes, right? Which pretty much is this, and it's something that always kind of fascinated me, right? The idea of taking theatricality, like taking something like out of a stage play, or in this case, a ballet, and putting it to screen, putting it on film, right? And that's exactly what they did here with that film, right? And while at the same time telling a story built around that, right? Um, but yeah, those films pretty much influence Scorsese, right? And yeah, even though the film itself, this story or this film is told from his perspective, it's really about, yeah, it's about Michael and Emmerich, right? And how their films were made, the themes that they explored. It's usually like, pre-war and post-war stuff that they were addressing, especially when it came to like to Britain itself and how they were going to grow and develop after like the world wars and whatnot, right? Um, there's like a lot of like genuine humanity and sensibility to it as well too, there's really strong characters and whatnot, great character pieces are involved in their work and whatnot, right? And usually they are optimistic, right? Even though most of their films kind of play out in a sort of like a tragic kind of way, right? In a sense, right? But yeah, it's just what they brought to the table though, and how that pretty much influenced, not just inspired British cinema, but also inspires Scorsese's work, right? And how he approaches films, right? He himself would make reference to how, Powell and Pressburger's films inspired stuff that he did, or I should say how he referenced their work in stuff like Taxi Driver or The Age of Innocence or what else? Mean Streets, right? Or Raging Bull, for example, right? So he will reference his own films, right? but also to you get a sense you get a sense of how they function in the film industry back in the 40s and 50s, right? They had an opportunity. They had the they had creative control at a point in time. I should say throughout the majority of their career, and that resulted in some of their most experimental films. Um, but they still stand as just masterpieces, right? Just in cinema general, not just in art film, right? Whether it's Black Narcissus or the Red Shoes or the Life and Death of Colonel Blimp and films like that. A Matter of Life and Death is also mentioned as well. This was a show that I always heard the title of, and when I actually saw what it was about, it was really, really like it was just really fascinating me, right? I will say stylistically, this reminds me a lot of a film called A Life in Pictures, which was about the life and times of Stanley Kubrick, right? Which was narrated by Tom Cruise. You would know he starred in Kubrick's last film, Eyes Wide Shut, right? Where you're being told of the trajectory of the filmmakers and their career and whatnot, right? But when it comes to the movies themselves, they will kind of stop and explore the films and what they were about, the techniques that we use, what was so cutting edge about what they did and whatnot, right? I will say though that if you do like spoilers, like or I should say, like if you're really like going to seek out their work, right? And for me, I really do, right? Because all I really saw from them is Black Narcissus, right? Narcissus, right? If I got the name wrong, forgive me, right? That's like that and I'll get to the last film in a bit, right? So those are the only two that I saw from them. But I really do want to see their other work as well, right? But I didn't mind it, but I know for some people that might be an issue. Yeah, they kind of do some spoilers, right? But that's to be expected in what is primarily a film essay, right? A video essay on their career and whatnot, right? So yes, you will see the their great works and they will tell you the story, but they don't give you like every single detail as to what happened, but they'll show you like the end or the climax and how that matters and what they were doing stylistically and thematically and stuff like that, right? So if you don't like spoilers when it comes, if you just want to see this but you don't want to see how the movies end, I would just recommend just somehow fast forwarding until they get to the next film and whatnot, right? But for me, surprise surprise, yeah, I absolutely love this though. I was so engrossed in this, mainly because I've always known about, I've always heard about them, right? But I'll confess I have not seen all of the films, so I still haven't seen A Matter of Life and Death. I still haven't seen Killer Blimp. I do even remember seeing the Red Shoes. I may have seen it, but I don't remember it though, and that still remains their most revered work, right? But the second film that I saw from them now, and this is where the show kind of closes off, right, is what is, in my opinion, one of the best psychological thrillers or horrors I would say ever made, Peeping Tom. This was directed by Michael Powell, but because of the lurid, controversial nature of it, I'm not going to spoil what it's about, but it's kind of brilliant. Yeah, Powell's career pretty much ended, right? The show got this critical traction because of just how perverse at the time, the subject matter was, right? It's genius and really meta when you think about it now, right? But at the time, yeah, British critics wasn't having that at all, but they lambast that film, and yeah, it was banned for some years, right? But thankfully, we could all see it now, and it's on home media right now. I need to get that in my collection right now, and it's on Criterion as well too, right? And should I just mention lastly, it's great that Scorsese is what was central, front and center with this film too, because yeah, he was the one who helped really restore the Red Shoes, right? And I think that he helped restore a couple other films from Powell and Pressburger as well, right? So you could see how his love for for their films just transcend mere references, right? Yeah, it was about just making sure that these shows last the test of time, right? And I would say that this show here, this movie here, is just another film that will make sure that the films of Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger stand the test of time, right? Yeah, so not surprised. I absolutely love this film. This is one of the best docs I've seen all year. And it's one that I'm definitely gonna watch over again. But the best thing about this show though is that it really put me on to their films, right? And yeah, I want to watch all the films that they've made here, right? I even want to rewatch Peeping Tom, right? Because yeah, I absolutely love that film, right? Yeah, for me, rating wise, I'm gonna give this a strong 4.5 out of 5, right? So it's the equivalent of a 9 out of 10 for you. hell, I can actually probably give it a 10 out of 10, but I wouldn't give it that as yet. I feel like I feel like I have to give it one more viewing or a couple more viewings to give it like an absolute 10 out of 10 or 5 out of 5, right? If you are a film nerd or you just want to learn more about film, yeah, you absolutely need to check this out, right? And it's Martin Scorsese is narrating the whole thing, right? So you can't go wrong. I mean, just this man's wealth of knowledge is just, I mean, amazing in my opinion, right? But yeah, I am glad that a movie like this exists. I'm glad that I actually took the time to check it out. It's like a couple hours and some change, but it is absolutely worth checking out. And even if you're not, if you don't know who these guys are, trust me, after this, you're gonna be seeking out their work. You're gonna be inspired by the stuff that they did, how they experimented with color and sound and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, boy, just the creativity that they put with their films, though. Yeah, I can imagine that, just inspiring generations of filmmakers, right? And not just in Britain, but across the world, right? So yes, Made in England is fantastic, and I strongly recommend
Nice.
checking it out. Yeah. And last but not least, let me talk about Longlegs, which the moment I saw the trailer and the moment that people were saying, "Oh, this could be the scariest horror of the year," I was like, "All right,
Yeah,
is
'cause
it though? Let me
I
go and
heard
see."
I heard it's Hereditary meets Silence of the Lambs.
Yes, Silence of the Lambs, you're correct with that, right? This show owes a lot to Silence of the Lambs, right? And that could be a problem for some people, some viewers, but I'll get to that in a bit. But
Right.
Hereditary, I didn't think about Hereditary anymore as you bring it up. Yes, yeah, you're absolutely right, though, especially with the supernatural elements involved in this, right? The sell of this, right? Well, the first sell of it was how they were talking about it being, oh, this could be the scariest movie of the year, right? And also, yeah, that first trailer was hard though. Like it just really roped me in though. I really got the intensity behind the film itself, right? But another reason why I went to see it, this is for me the main reason why people go and see it is because of we boy Nicolas Cage.
Right. Right.
Yeah, Nikki is in this, man, and people, even when that trailer dropped, right, and leading up to the release of the film, people were talking about how this was going to be one of his most unhinged, most terrifying performances he ever put out.
Yeah, but
For the most,
we don't have Mandy to it.
yeah, I know, yeah, yeah, yeah. I know it's a good thing you bring up Mandy because I saw little bits of Mandy as in Nicolas Cage Mandy in this, right? So what Longlegs is about, right? It centers on the character of Lee Harker, who is played by Micah Monroe. And she is this FBI agent who is assigned to look for this serial killer by the name of Longlegs, right? And yeah,
Yeah.
just off that line alone, yes, of course, Silence of the Lambs comes to mind. Yes, it is this nerve, oftentimes nervous, female agent, in this, I don't know, in this institution that's mostly run by men and whatnot, and she's haunted by the past, and she's going after this serial killer who is doing all these really like graphic, really like grotesque crimes and whatnot, right?
Yeah.
Um, but in this case, though, so the crimes themselves, right, are very disgusting, right? And it involves families being killed, right? But it usually happens on a certain day, right? Also, what happens is that the killer, like there's no evidence of the killer himself being in the house when the killings take place, right? So
Right.
it's
Right.
usually
Right.
the families get wiped out, but what they find out is that there's somebody in the house that does it, and then he kills himself afterwards, right? But the person who kills himself is usually a relative or at least somebody who lives in the house, right? So the question really is how the killer gets into the house and does
Right.
what happens, right? That's it just, right? So Lino and well, her superior, who is called Agent Carter, who is played by Blair Underwood.
Okay.
Yes, Blair Underwood Huss.
Yeah. That's a
That
hot minute.
that last time I see he for your trainees out there is one of those Omega Excel ads, dog, that they just can't seem to get rid of. This is our equivalent, foreigners to paid programming, right? So on TV6 and on CSC3, they usually run these ads promoting the Omega Excel, capsules, right? But
Right. Right.
yeah, one of them involved Blair Underwood, and there's this really cringy moment where you talk about how you want a roti. Look it up. Look it
Yeah,
up.
yeah, yeah. I don't
Watch
know.
it. You'll know what I'm talking about, right? But anyway, right? So yes, so they go in, they're looking for this guy, and it's just all these like really sick and demented crimes, right? But then they learn also that it may have to do with the occult. Yes, there's some Satanism going on, right, and whatnot, right? And I'll stop here. I'll stop here, right? I may reveal a little bit more, little bits and pieces of what happens next, but I'll just leave it there at the basics, right? It's just hunt for a serial killer. That's what it is, right? So here's the thing about this movie, right? For one thing, I am genuinely happy that I saw this in theaters. Because
Okay.
honestly, I cannot remember the last time that I actually went out of my way to see a horror movie in theaters. For me, the reason why I can avoid them is not because I don't want to watch horrors. It's just that usually when people say that it's the scariest thing, I kind of just am adults, right?
Yeah.
And then usually because of most horrors these days just being kind of generic, right? So it's just like, all right, well, I don't need to go out of my way to see like the Nun or whatever spin-off, whatever
Yeah,
it is.
most of those is be kind
I
of
could
the work for me. Yeah.
exactly, but I know you will have like the rare successes, like like for example Abigail, right? I heard Abigail was pretty good, even though I haven't seen it. I talked about the first Omen before in a previous episode, but I didn't see that theatrically, right? But point is, yeah, I always have my reservations when it comes to watching horror movies because I want to get the experience. I want to come out of it feeling shook, right, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I came out of this one feeling real shook. I was shook
Okay.
by this, right?
Okay. Nice.
Um, Here's the catch with this though, right? It's about that whole scariest horror of the year thing. Um, that's all marketing, folks. This is not the scariest movie that you'll see all year. However, this is one of the creepiest shows you'll see all year. This is creepy as fuck, though. Wow, this got under my skin, Shred. And really, it's just about how unnerving the entire experience was, right? And that's largely in part to the direction, which is handled by Osgood Perkins, right? I'm
Right.
not familiar with this guy's work, but fun fact, he
So
actually
yeah,
is
what I heard.
The son of Anthony Perkins, i.e.,
Right.
Norman Bates from Psycho, right?
All right. What I know about? Okay, so I just got a couple of spoiler reviews for this that just kind of spoiled it for me. They basically just said, look, it's an episode of CSI Criminal Minds or one of those, right? It's that, it's
Yeah,
that, but just well made, just scripted strong, but the filmmaking is why it works. That's what I heard about it.
yeah.
Right.
Because yeah, filmmaking wise, this is fantastic, dude. Like just from the beginning to end, dude, right? Just the stuff that he does, just the creative choices, not anything too mind blowing or revolutionary, right? But just little choices, right? So case in point, how it opens with like a 4:3 kind of 8mm kind of look. But just the setting of it, though, and what's being set up there, it just sets up the creepiness quickly, right? Title cards, for example, right? The use of music, right? It's just designed from start to the end. This coming from somebody who watched all the credits, start to the very end is designed to creep you out, right? But yes, it does use familiar techniques, right? So I would say that if you're a horror connoisseur, you're like, yeah, I know about this. Yeah, I know about that. But yeah, mad points though for the direction though, the blocking, the framing, the
Right.
editing, the way how scenes transition though. So like just near perfect in my opinion, Jed. It's almost like if Wes Anderson just went out the way and decided he wanted to do some creepy psychological thriller. This is how it would look like, right? The tone of it though, just so dark and bleak though, and it works, it fits though, and it's always consistent from start to end as well, right? Performances for what they work pretty strong as well, right? The characterization is a little weak though, especially when it comes to the two main leads. That would be like Micah Monroe, who plays the lead, who plays
Yeah.
Lee. Yeah. Right. So okay, so she is very, very reserved, right? And she's almost kind of how to say, she's very observant, right? And then you learn early on that she has psychic capabilities as well. It's
Right. Right.
kind of weird, but it's the will of Longlegs, right? And it's kind of justified in the way how she moves and how she looks at life and whatnot, right? And how she observes things around her, right? But I wish there could have been a little bit more development of her, right? Like how they did with Jodie Foster's character, right?
Right.
with Clarice Sterling in Silence of the Lambs. There was a lot more flesh out of her, right? Here she's scared and it has to do with something in the past, and it's understandable, right? But this how she moves around people still is kind of weird, but they kind of don't really explain it. But I guess that's the point, right? And then just to talk, this last performance I want to mention too, Blair Underwood is pretty good as well, right? As the superior, he does what he does and whatnot, right? They do some with him. They do some really cool with him. In any film, that's also spoil anything that really really worked. I really like that. But yes, the performance that everybody's going to be talking about is from Nicolas Cage, right? So here's the thing. It is unhinged. It is insane. It is crazy, right? But the thing is, though, while I do really like the performance, it's pretty much Nicolas Cage doing crazy shit again. And this man could do this in his sleep, in this stage of his career, right? It's just that. It's just in this case, he's just this creepy, weird kind of character. That's what he is, right? I do like how the show introduces him, right? And how the show plays on who is this guy? Who is this guy? Who is this guy, right? So then when you actually do see him now, it's like, yeah, he's just a flat out weirdo, right? But in the context of what the show is really about, I'll get to that in a bit, it makes sense why he is the way he is, right? But I can imagine some people watching this and saying, yeah, this is just Nicolas Cage doing what Nicolas Cage does, right? I mean, for one thing, what I love about him, for better or for worse, is that when a man gets a role, he puts himself in that role, right? Even if he comes out laughable, like see the Wicker Man, for example, that man puts everything into that role, right? And this case is like, yeah, I am just gonna be the creepiest motherfucker you've ever seen, right? And it works, like it works for the most part, right? But yes, it does feel like a hodgepodge of various serial killer characters that you've seen on screen, whether it's whether it's John Doe from Seven or whether it's Hannibal Lecter from Silence of the Lambs. But the one character that they're going to reference with him a lot too is Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs, right? But what the show does well here, this is what really makes this stand out, and this is where you could do the contrast now, not so much the comparison, but the contrast with Silence of the Lambs now is the supernatural element. Because yes, they bring up the whole thing that these killings are satanic. They had to deal with revelations. They have to deal with the devil and all that kind of stuff, right? I know, Ricardo, for you, this is kind of stuff that you roll your eyes at, but in the context of the show, it works, right? So going back to what I said about the first Omen, right, and where it was set in the early 70s. Yeah, this show also too involves something that takes place in the 70s, right? And even the soundtrack, in particular song, I'm not sure what the name of it is right now. I forget the name of it, right? Yes. The show itself and the way how it's presented kind of harkens back to 70s supernatural horror films, right? The way how they play around with, the real reason behind this all this kind of stuff. Yes, it does harken back to those films like, The Omen and Rosemary's Baby and stuff like that, right? But they do something kind of creative in terms of how, all these murders take place, right? I'm not going to spoil what it is about, right? But I know for some people, it is admittedly implausible, right? It's implausible, but in the world of Longlegs, I know I keep using this term, right? But in the context, in the world of this, it kind of makes sense in a twisted kind of way, right? So it's not meant to be real at all, like something like that, like how these murders really take place wouldn't really happen like that, right? But is the whole supposed, it's what it's really about, that's where the real scares come into play, right? So it's like that. It kind of plays on, this is not real, but this is kind of, it's the awareness of it all, though. That's what it plays on the most, right? So you're not supposed to read it as something as being, overly realistic, like how Silence of the Lambs is. The joy with that film, though, is how real it felt. Like it felt like, this was inspired by some real life, killing spree or something like that, right? But this one feels more like it's harkening back to, just to supernatural horror films of the 70s. It always has that kind of element to it. And I'm always drawn to that too. I guess that's why, for better or for worse, I kind of like the Conjuring films, right? Because they feel like 70s horror throwbacks in a sense, right? And this one feels like that. It feels like a 70s throwback, but also because it's mainly set in the 90s, it also has like a 90s psychological thriller feel. So yes, you'll get elements of Seven, you'll get elements of Silence of the Lambs, of course, right? It has that kind of feel, right? but it's more on the 70s vibe. That's what it's going for. I think that's like a nice fit, right? There's a nice little subversion they do involving who Longlegs is. I thought that was really, really clever as well. And I think that the payoff is absolutely worth it though. And that's all I want to say without spoiling anything, right? And this last part I just want to make before I get to before it, final thoughts, right? One thing I do like about this show, at least one theme that I got out of it though, is the idea of, all right, I'll just use this term, vessel. It's about being used to do something, right? Being used for some really dark and demented purpose. That's where I feel this is what Longlegs is really about. It's just these characters who are in this really weird position, in this kind of weird setup, right? But they all being played, they all being, puppets, if you will, right? I don't want to spoil anything beyond that, right? And it's all about this grand scheme, right? This grand devilish scheme. That's really the message of that's really the whole point of the movie, right? So of course, I know there will be people that will nitpick the reality of things, like, oh, this is kind of dumb, this kind of don't make sense. But again, if you look at it from the supernatural lens, it's like it's not really supposed to make sense. It's just supposed to be weird and twisted. That's kind of the point of it all. That's the gist of it, right? And yeah, I think for the most part, it works, right? But just in closing, yes, the references to science alarms and stuff are understandable. Yes, it is a clear, tribute to that, right? I understand that, right? But I have no problem with that though. I do like its subtle and non-subtle homages to classic horror films or whatnot, right? That being said, though, I know that people will go in with expectations high because they're hearing best horror of the year, or the best horrors of the year. They'll come out like that wasn't no horror, that wasn't scary. And for me, like, I more saw it as just this really unsettling psychological thriller, but it has elements of horror in it, right? But it's not like, the scariest thing since The Exorcist. That's not what it is, right? And if you see people calling it that, it's like, no, that's not what it is. It's just marketing. That's all it is, right? That's all it is, right? For me, I enjoy the experience of seeing it theatrically, the sound design, the direction, just seeing those visuals though, like, will always stay with me, right? And just how deeply unsettling the whole experience was. Yeah, I will remember this show for a while. But in no way can I call this like a masterpiece or whatnot, right? It's just a very well executed horror thriller. That's the best way I could sum it up. Which is not bad. That's not a bad thing at all, right? So for me, rating wise, I'm gonna give this a lighter decent 4 out of 5, man. I feel like if I watch it a couple more times, I could bump the rating a little bit more. Who knows? Maybe it might show up in my best stuff, or at least in my honorable mentions, right? But I would say when it comes to other reviewers or critics or whatnot, seeing that this is the best horror of the year, whatnot, take those comments with a grain of salt. You know what I mean? Like, if you do plan on seeing it for yourself, take those comments with a grain of salt. Don't go into this one expecting this thing to be The Exorcist or, the new Salsa Lambs or whatnot. That's not what it is, right? It's kind of like a homage to old school horror films and psychological thrillers and serial killer films as well. That's really what it is. But in no way can I honestly call this the scariest thing of the year or of the decade. It's not that, right? But I will remember the experience of seeing it theatrically. I hope that I get that same experience when I watch it home, because yes, I do plan on watching it when it comes out digitally. And I would say, yeah, if you're a horror fan, yeah, definitely check it out, man. But again, keep your expectations low with this one. Don't go in like thinking it's going to be the scariest thing ever, right? And if you're curious, yeah, check it out as well too, right? But again, expectations low. And lastly, keep your expectations low as well too for the Nicolas Cage performance as well, right? Because yes, people will say it's disturbing and it's weird and all that kind of stuff. But again, if you're familiar with Nicolas Cage's work, especially when it comes to dark material like Mandy, for example, yeah, you kind of know what to expect, right? It's just in this case, it's just creepy for the sake of being creepy. But in Nicolas Cage standards, it works, right? So that's the best compliment I could give it. But yeah, Longlegs worked for me, man. It may not work for other viewers, but I thought it clicked with me. It actually did click with me, right? So I would say if you're curious, or if you just want to see what the hype is about, or if you just enjoy really creepy, unsettling horror films, yeah, give this one a look, man.